this week on the Metal mailing list, you guys read the emails on the Metal mailing list. So there was a question about television, and the question to me revolved around regulating TV. And if you think about it, it's really weird when the government gets involved in entertainment. And the result in the TV business, all the distortions and all the stuff that doesn't make sense to you as a customer of the cable company, almost all of that's attributable to government regulation. And so if you trace it back to its origin, there's all these Orwellian rules in the TV business, like must carry, that comes from Congress. And so that distorts the TV market. And if you think that's distorted, then brace yourselves, because the lottery business, it's a government-run entertainment organization. And it's run by governments all over the world. And imagine next time you're at the airport going through airport security, look at those TSA people, those sort of slow-moving people who are scanning you and searching you. And imagine them trying to design a game. And then you can imagine the world I've been in the last couple of years working with the lotteries. I got an email from somebody on the Metal list who said, "What are you now, a lottery expert?" And I said, "No, I'm not a lottery expert. I'm an expert in inventing new things, launching new businesses." But the lotteries have come to me. They've been reaching out to me to get involved. So the last 2 years I've spent around the world working with lotteries, running workshops. I've given 4 keynote speeches. I run a seminar for them now on game design because they suddenly realize they need to learn how to design new games. And I'm going to tell you about what I've learned along the way. It's kind of a crazy thing. The subtitle is, "Will the lottery be disrupted?" The short version of the talk is yes. You can go. That's it. That's all I've got for you. The slightly longer version is yes, but it's not what you think. So let me tell you how this all began for me. A couple years ago, about 2.5 years ago, I got a phone call from an agent, a speaker bureau, and they said, "Oh my gosh, we're so glad we reached you. We've been trying desperately to find," actually, scratch that, I got a phone call from an agent who said, we've been desperately trying to reach you. We've been looking everywhere to find you. Man, we're so glad we finally tracked you down. And I said, "Well, I have a website, and there's a contact me button. If you click it, it comes straight to my phone. Like, it's not that hard to find me." That was the first hint that the people I was dealing with in this booking were probably not the most technically astute group of people. Sure enough, the booking was for NASPL, North American State and Provincial Lotteries. This is an association of all the lotteries. It's 50-some lotteries, all of Canada and the 44 US states and 3 territories that run lotteries. And they wanted me to come in and do a talk, and I was like, how on earth, why were they tracking me down? Well, it turns out that about 13 years earlier, when I was at Sony, I was working on game shows at Sony, and I was launching all of Sony's interactive TV and broadband games and internet games. And we had games in every category: console games, we were building mobile games, we were developing games for TV. And the one area we didn't have games in was lottery games, games of chance. And so I wanted to get into that, and I actually designed a whole thing for the lotteries where you could have a game show, because a lot of them do have a ball-dropping kind of game show on TV. And so we could connect that to a game you could download to your computer at the time or a phone, and people could play along. And maybe we could even sell tickets. And that was a little too futuristic in 1998. So in 2011, they finally called me back. That's their idea of, like, we'll call you next week. When a talent agent is like, "Love you, babe, I'll call you next week." For the lottery, it's like a 14-year span between the time when you pitch an idea and it kind of dawns on them that they could do this. So I went back and prepared a talk for them, and then that was kind of my re-entry into the lottery business. I hadn't been in it for about 13 years. Not a hell of a lot had changed. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the lottery to start. So it's a kind of a conceit of our era that we're inventing all this stuff for the first time, right? That's how internet people always think about everything they're doing. We're the first to ever think of any of this. If you think of these 2 concepts, gamification or game-based marketing and crowdfunding, we think they're super new, they're like the shiny new thing, big a lot of buzz around all of those things. But in fact, the lottery is the original gamified crowdfunding process, and it goes back to prehistoric times, before we could even write down history. Every culture, the lottery is mentioned in the Bible 77 times. In 200 BC, the Han Emperor of China invented Keynote, and they used it to raise defense funds so that they could build the Great Wall of China. Roman emperors have all used some form of lottery to raise funds for public works projects. This is Julius Caesar. He used the lottery 2 ways. One was to raise money for public works and improve the roads and so forth. But the other way he used it was, you've heard of decimation. When people say, like, "Oh, wow, last week our team got decimated in that game." They're using that term in a metaphorical way. He didn't use it in a metaphorical way. He used it in a literal way. When his army lost a battle and they were ashamed, they decimated the group that lost, the army that lost, was decimated. And that meant that they drew lots, and whoever drew, every 10th person who drew a lot would get stoned by the other 9 guys, and that was decimation. So they used the lottery 2 ways. Not really a fun story, I guess. Queen Elizabeth invented the instant draw sweepstakes. I know, this is amazing. You can't believe it. Queen Elizabeth won, not the current Queen Elizabeth. And this is an interesting thing. So lotteries come into vogue. It's a great way for a government to quickly raise funds. People don't seem to mind it. They get excited about it. So one way to describe a lottery is it's a tax that people don't mind paying because it feels like kind of fun. They have a chance that they might win some money. But what also happens is it's like a pendulum. The next administration comes in and they say, that's shameful, it's bad, the government shouldn't be in gambling. And sure enough, that happened. So she introduced the first British lottery, and then Queen Anne came in and banned it. And then I think the next king came in and opened it up again. Jamestown Colony. So the United States wouldn't be here if it weren't for lotteries. In the colonies, all the colonies except Massachusetts ran lotteries, and they ran hundreds of them. They ran them for every kind of public works project. The Jamestown Colony would have starved to death if it weren't for the lottery. It was the only way they could keep their finances going. Benjamin Franklin, all the founding fathers of the United States were involved in the lottery business. In 1748, Benjamin Franklin ran a lottery to buy cannons, to raise money to buy cannons to defend the city of Philadelphia from Indians. That was during the French and Indian Wars. And what he managed to buy were defective cannons from Boston who didn't need them anymore. It's kind of a bad deal for him. George Washington was involved in a number of lotteries. In 1768, this is his signature on a lottery ticket. He was trying to raise money to develop roads in Virginia. It wasn't a successful lottery. In fact, this ticket was sold, this ticket with his signature on it, sold for more as a kind of collector's item than all the money that the lottery raised at the time. In 1776, the Continental Congress authorized the first United States lottery, or I guess American lottery, to raise money for the U.S. Army, the Continental Army that was fighting the British. And from 1740 until the early 1800s, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, and Dartmouth all raised money for their endowment using a lottery process. Who knew, right? Think about it, when you pay your alumni dues, if you do for your college, or your alumni giving for your college, think about if there was a chance that you might win something back. How much more likely would it be for alumni associations if you ran it like a lottery today? I think it's a brilliant idea, right? So the gamification aspect of this makes it kind of fun. So by the 1800s, lotteries were in full swing all over the world, not just in the US. And it was a little bit out of control, particularly in the US. It wasn't really regulated very tightly, and where it was regulated, it was also very corrupt. And so by the 1830s, they had problems. There were scandals. And so lotteries started to get banned. And the story of the 1800s is this kind of pendulum swing between lotteries being a great, easy way to raise money for everything from hospitals to bridges and roads. They were building America at that time. So this is a great way to raise money fast for a project. But then every once in a while, there'd be a scandal. And the scandals are outrageous when you read about them. Like, people just shanghaied the money and split. You didn't win the prize. You thought you won. You got the ticket. But then the guy with the money took off. So eventually, each state banned it. By the middle of the century, we're starting to ban lotteries. And by the end of the 19th century, by the end of the 19th century, the federal government banned 2 things. They banned interstate commerce of lotteries. In Louisiana, there was a scandal. They were selling tickets all across the South. So they banned that, and they also banned advertising of lotteries. So effectively, we went into prohibition around the end of the 19th century in the US. In fact, by 1917, the only lottery in the US was the Selective Service for World War I, because that's also another type of lottery. They used it again in Vietnam. This is where it gets personal. This is my grandfather, John Tercek. This is a picture of him in 1921. He was an immigrant. He came over from Eastern Europe like so many other people did at that time. You can imagine a great wave of people coming into the United States, passing through the halls of Ellis Island, and hitting the mean streets of New York, and eventually they found their way out to some factory somewhere in the Midwest. He made his way through the coal mines of Pennsylvania, and he was a coal miner. When he was done working, he would use his music, and he was a theater guy and a writer and a poet. They would gather together in their own ethnic groups, and they would kind of celebrate. That was how they amused themselves. There wasn't a lot of entertainment in the 1920s for these massive immigrant groups, particularly those who didn't speak English very well. You could go to the bowling alley. You could go to some pretty tawdry carnival sideshows that were around. They were pretty sleazy. If you had a nickel, you could go to the movies, or you could play a game of craps in the street. There was plenty of gambling going on. But remember, this was all prohibited activity at the time. Now, my grandfather wasn't a gambler, but he did participate in an immigrant lottery. These happened all the time. This is a big part of the culture, kind of the urban subculture of immigrants who didn't speak such great English. They were running lotteries all the time, and it was a chance for basically poor immigrants, poor working people, a chance for one of them to win big. That's a picture of my grandfather. He won big. He won that Model A Ford. I think it's a Model A, but he won that car in 1921, 1922. So that's a picture of him. He didn't keep the car for long. He was very proud of it. You can see in that picture. I was amazed when we found this at my mom's house. I was like, unbelievable. I've heard this story so many times. But here's the picture of him. He sold the car, and with the money, he wired the money to my grandmother, who was in Ljubljana in Yugoslavia, asked her to marry him, and she used the money to buy a ticket to America. So that's how my family got to America. The lottery actually made it possible for my family to come to America. It's kind of an amazing story. And when I was a little kid, my grandfather, when he got in a fight with his wife, he would sit down out on the porch with a cigarette and he'd go, I should have kept that damn car. I'm dead serious. I'm not making this stuff up. Okay, so that period, the 1920s, was a prohibition. If you've seen Boardwalk Empire, you totally get a kind of the atmosphere of the era. I like that show because I think it's probably very authentic to what was going on. So it was prohibited, which meant organized crime. And in fact, the whole period of the first half of the 20th century, the only lotteries in existence in the United States were run by organized crime. They called it policy, and they sold it in storefronts like this. So this is a beauty parlor in Harlem that was a front for policies. You can see there's no women going in that shop. It's all guys. And when they raided these shops, as they routinely did, they found very sophisticated mechanisms. This was a big business for the gangsters. You know, we think about organized crime. We think about extortion rackets, you know, the protection rackets. We think about smuggling whiskey and so forth, contraband, drugs perhaps. But we don't tend to think about the numbers business. Numbers was a really big business. Selling policy was a big deal all over the United States. Fast forward to 1975, Cleveland. I was a little kid. I was a newspaper boy for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And so I was like a little independent business person. And I felt like it was my job to know my product. So I read the newspaper every day before I delivered it. And so there were a few stories that were really recurring in the early 70s. The Vietnam War, which I didn't really understand. Busing, which I did understand because that affected me. It was like, well, that was kind of a weird thing to get on a bus and go to a different part of town for school. And the lottery, which was a big controversy. So in Cleveland, 1975, you had a very moralistic group of people. I was a Catholic. I went to Catholic church. I remember the priest was giving his sermon, and he was speaking out against the lottery, like the government should not be in the gambling business. This is wrong. What happened is around the 1960s, states started to introduce the lottery. The first one to do it was New Hampshire. You know, in New Hampshire, live free or die. They don't like taxes. They have low tax. They're very proud of that. So instead of having a tax, they introduced a lottery. And the way they finessed the federal government is they ran it like a sweepstakes. And it was designed precisely to market to Massachusetts and the surrounding states, Maine and Vermont. Naturally, those states followed suit. So in the late 60s, they all launched their own lotteries because they didn't want to see this revenue going off to New Hampshire. And so gradually, the lotteries came back into existence, and they started in New England, but they made their way to the Midwest by the 1970s. Very slow process. States were launching it, and there was controversy in every state. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Cleveland and the Ohio situation, because I know the story very, very well. This guy's Ed Kovacic. This is a picture of him when I knew him. He was my football coach at St. Jerome's Elementary School. We played Catholic Youth League football. And that's a picture of him later in life when he was the chief of police. When I knew him, he was the head of the detectives, Cleveland detectives. So our football team was coached by cops in Cleveland. So on Sunday morning, we'd all be playing football, you know, Little League football, and all the coaches were policemen. They were either detectives or they were cops, just regular beat cops. But the funny part was the neighborhood I grew up in was called Collinwood. If you know Cleveland at all, it's a kind of a tough part of town, and it's all Irish and German and other immigrants, Italian kids. Well, most of the kids on my team were the sons of mobsters, quite a few kids. And there was the Irish mob, and there was the Italian mob, and there was a Jewish mob, and there's a bit of a gang war going on. So these two guys are characters that are well known in Cleveland. The guy on the left is Shandor Burns. His original name was Alexander Bernstein. He came from Hungary, but he turned it into Shandor Burns. It's a pretty cool name, very colorful guy, even from the early 1940s. Until the 1970s, he was well known as the most wanted man in Cleveland. He ran the numbers racket in Cleveland. The guy on the right is Danny Green. Anybody hear about Danny Green? Yeah, so he was the guy you couldn't kill, right? He was the Irishman, they called him, the crazy Irishman. And he ran the Longshoremen in Cleveland, which was an Irish-dominated union, and that was his power base, and he wanted to get into the numbers racket. So these guys had a feud going on in Cleveland. So Shondor Burns didn't really like the fact that this young guy was trying to muscle into his turf. He'd run the numbers racket for decades in Cleveland. So he thought he'd send him a message that he wouldn't forget too soon. So they blew up his house. This is his house on Waterloo Road, Danny Green's house. I used to ride my bike down Waterloo Road on the way to school in the morning. One day I rode by, and that's what it looked like. I mean, honest to God, this is like me growing up. Wow, Danny Green's house. We all knew he was a gangster. His house got blown up. Like, whoa, he got the tip off. And so he climbed up on his roof, and when the house fell down, he rode down with it on the roof. He came out scot-free. Shondor Burns tried to kill him 4 times. One time he was jogging in a park, and they sent a guy to kill him in a car who drove down the path, like the runway, the jogging path, in a car to run him down. And Danny Green had a gun. He would jog with a gun with a .45, pulls out the .45 and shoots the guy in the car. Self-defense, gets off scot-free. The next time they tried to kill Danny Green, he was driving down the street. He drove a big Lincoln Continental Mark IV, and they threw a bomb in his car. He picks it up from the floor and throws it back into the other car and blew the other guys up. The guy was unreal. So like it's an amazing story, Danny Green. And he's like a legend in Cleveland because he's so tough. Irish people love this guy, right? And he was the guy they couldn't kill. And actually made the Italian mob look really, really bad, because they were supposed to kill him, and the East Coast Italian families, they called him the gang that couldn't shoot straight. That's where that phrase came from, because the Cleveland mafia couldn't kill this Irish guy. And so a huge bombing war began. Now all sides were in on it, and so the first guy to go was Shondor Burns. Danny Green blew him up. Now Irish guys knew a little bit about explosives, of course, so it wasn't hard for them to figure out how to get a bomb under Shondor Burns' car. They blew his torso right through the roof, and it landed 2 blocks away, smoking. I know all about this because my football coach took us downtown to the Cleveland Police Force to see. They showed us the ballistics and the reports and stuff. We were like these, we're like 10 and 11-year-old kids. This was like amazing for us to go down and see the ballistics department at the Cleveland Police Force. But we actually knew all these guys. So then that started a car bombing war. So Cleveland, in 1976, there were 36 car bombs that went off in the greater Cleveland area. That's like every other week there was a car bombing in Cleveland. I'm delivering the newspapers, and this was like normal. This is how I grew up. It's a tough town, man. Cleveland, it's a tough place to live. So eventually they did get Danny Green. They blew him up. They finally, they just kept trying. He went to a dentist's office, and while he was in dentist's office, they pulled 2 cars in next to his car. Both cars were loaded with explosives. They had guys with shotguns parked at the front of the parking lot. In case the bombs didn't go off, they were determined to get this guy. So he came out of the dentist's office, went over to get into his Lincoln Continental, which is there. They triggered the bomb there, and they found his blown-up corpse underneath the car later. So my football coach was the head of detectives. They solved this case. They caught the guy who did it, the murderer, who was an Italian guy, who ended up ratting out the Italian mob, and they ended up rolling up this whole group, the Italian mob, the Murray Hill Gang in Cleveland, who then, in that process, they got a lot of evidence that was used to start to break down the East Coast mob scene as well. So that was kind of like the beginning of the end for the Italian mob. So this is kind of a turning point. But the reason I'm telling all this to you is all of this activity, all this like lethal combat that was going on in the streets of Cleveland, it all revolved around the numbers racket, control of the numbers racket. So, I know there's a lot of people on the medal list who complain about government interference in business, and they wonder why we have to have government interference. I certainly was puzzled. Why on earth would you want the government in the game business? This is why. So in the beginning, in 1974, Cleveland, Ohio, and the state of Ohio passed this law to have a lottery, but it was kind of reluctant, right? They weren't really gung-ho about having a lottery. They sort of wanted to have it. It's like a tax. Okay, fine. But then this started going on, this numbers racket, this gang war was going on every day in the paper. Somebody was getting arrested or indicted or blown up. And so finally, the citizens started to demand that Ohio start marketing the lottery because they said, let's end this numbers game once and for all. So the reason the government is in this business is because it was in the hands of criminals, and it took that kind of an effort to actually take that business away from the criminals. So if you ever wonder why governments run the lottery, that's why. Because it was in the hands of criminals that were running this numbers racket. I think they should legalize it, but that's just me. Okay, so Ohio lottery. That's the origins of the Ohio lottery. So meanwhile, I was thinking about this talk they asked me to do, and I hadn't really been in the lottery business since 1999, but I had this obligation to prepare a talk, and so I thought, well, gosh, a lot has changed since 1999. Now we have robot cars and robot bars and killer robots in the sky, and we have robots resupplying the space shuttle, and this is a liver that was printed on a 3D printer. I mean, it's like a human organ that's printed on a 3D printer. Your cell phone has gotten all these capabilities in the last 10 years. So like in the interval between when I first pitched the lottery business to make some kind of interactive game show to the time when they actually invited me to come back and talk, all of these transitions had happened. New kind of computing, tablet computing had occurred. So since 1999, the world had changed tremendously, but the lottery hadn't changed at all. It hadn't changed one bit. The last innovations in the lottery business were in the 90s, the Powerball and Megaball, these multi-state lottery games. That's it. So the lottery has not changed at all. They still sell the same dumb tickets, the same dumb games, scratch-off type games and so forth. If you think about the incredible innovation that's occurred in the game industry, and frankly, the huge dislocations that have occurred to traditional game companies in that interval, you realize, wow, the clock just stopped. This business has been frozen in time for 30 years. That's kind of because the government is involved, right? There's no competition. So this is what I showed them when I went to do a talk. I said, this is how I look at your business. You move at a glacial pace, and you have all these barriers to innovation. There's a lot of regulation. Of course, it's a regulated gaming business. There's a lot of politics behind the scenes. So even if you have a lottery director who's got ambition, that's pretty rare, he probably won't make progress because the politics around it. There's also plenty of bureaucratic inertia. The lottery directors are appointed by governors in the US, which is actually not the best approach. Usually it's somebody who worked on the governor's campaign, and their job is basically to fund the governor's slush fund. That's what the lottery money is used for. So I shouldn't say this, it's probably an exaggeration, but the people in the lottery organization do not want to get fired. That's like their number one thing. So if you think about the way a business works, we have entrepreneurs who are constantly trying stuff, and we're not afraid of failure, we're risking things. In the lottery business, it's quite the opposite. They're very risk averse. They don't want a scandal. They don't want anything to go wrong. They have to launch a game and it works. On the way in this morning, someone mentioned to me that big website that was put together, the healthcare.gov website, which is such a scandal. It costs a lot of money, doesn't really work, and so on. It's not like they're incompetent, the people that commissioned that website. It's kind of the government process requires you to do this big bloated specification up front. You can't try things as you go. This whole iterative software process that we have on the web, you can't do that in government. It's very difficult to do that. And there's only a limited number of companies that can deal with this. There are 3 big vendors that dominate the lottery business. And candidly, I've told them this themselves, they're not that interested in changing anything. They like it just the way it is because it's a great big business for them. I'll show you how big in just a second. There's a lot of barriers, but the number one barrier is there's no competition. These are government-sanctioned monopolies. Actually, they're government-owned monopolies. They don't compete with anybody. As a result, they just don't change. The lottery games haven't changed in 30 years. It's a pretty big business. $68 billion in 2010, 44 states in the United States, plus 3 territories. $68 billion. So here are the states that have it. There's just a few that don't. Nevada, of course, because of casinos, right? They're not going to have a lottery. Alaska and Hawaii don't. I'm not quite sure why. And Utah will not have any gaming, of course, at all. So here's how it stacks up against casino and tribal. These numbers are a couple years old, but they're pretty accurate. It hasn't really changed a lot in the last few years. In the US, $68 billion goes to lottery. Casino is only $37 billion, and tribal casinos, $26, $27 billion. Depends on the year. It's been bumping around, but the numbers are not that hugely off. I might be off by $1 billion. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but ballpark. And the point is, it's twice the size of these other businesses, which I was sort of surprised by. I always thought Vegas is like the big business. It turns out it's not really. So there's some unstoppable trends. This is why I believe the lottery is going to change. Social media causes mass participation. Social gaming is a gigantic trend, right? And then the mobile web gives people all kinds of great ways to access content, but there are no lottery games on mobile. Who's the guy who's doing the games on mobile? Right here, raise your hand. Yeah, so this guy's developing mobile games for the lotteries.
Not mobile games.
Not mobile, oh, okay.
No, it's mobile, but it's not games.
Right, okay, because it's not legal. I mean, there's only 2 states that have actually launched internet gaming of any sort, and I don't even know if they have mobile yet. Europe's a little bit further ahead. They have mobile going on. I'm going to talk about these 2 things in a second. New competition everywhere and gambling as mainstream culture. So I think these are the big trends that are going to force the lotteries to adapt, and if they don't, they're simply going to be rendered irrelevant. So when I went to the lottery group, I said, I'm going to do some predictions for you. Based on my experience in launching game businesses in mobile and on TV and on the internet, I think the future is pretty clear. The lottery of the future is going to look like this. It's going to have an app store. They'll have multiple games that run across every platform. They'll have some social, local, and mobile element. They have to. Lotteries are going to offer a combination of free and paid. Now, they can't grok free games. That's not their business. They're in the paid gaming business, right? So they're like, how can you possibly claim that? I'll show you in a second. I believe you're going to have free games with in-app purchasing because this is the dominant trend right now. I'll show you that in a second. I think the lotteries are going to offer a vast catalog of games that change very, very frequently. Now, this might strike you guys as perfectly obvious because all you got to do is look at your iPhone to see what I'm talking about, right? But this is a seismic shock when you talk to the lottery industry. This is not something that they're used to at all. They have very few games. The typical game cycle, it takes them 2 years to launch a new game. 2 years. Think about that. On iTunes, there's about 1,000 games launched every week on iTunes. So you have these two different worlds. One where the games are very slow to roll out, one game a year or one game, maybe 2 games a year, versus iTunes where there's a flood of new games all the time. Consumers are getting conditioned to new games on iTunes. When they turn to the lottery, it's weird that they can't get a new game that frequently. So I think consumer demand is going to drive this. So gambling everywhere is a big trend. Flashback to 75. When all these states were considering launching their lotteries in the 70s and then the 80s, really a big explosion in the 80s, you couldn't actually play games of chance in that many places. You could fly to Vegas. Remember, like your parents might have, my parents did, but they didn't go that often. Maybe they'd go once a year, once every other year or something. So Vegas was like an exotic destination for people in the 1970s. And then this guy came along. He was a young entrepreneur at the time. This is before he became a self-parody and had hair. And he went down to this really shabby, rundown city, Atlantic City. Did anyone go to Atlantic City in the 70s? I actually did. It was a shithole. I mean, it was just such a rundown dump. And his vision was, we're going to bring it back, kind of like back to the days of Boardwalk Empire. That was his vision. Pretty bold vision at the time. And so that started. You know, New Jersey started having East Coast gaming. You had racetracks, but actually most people's experience wasn't at the racetrack. It was off track. So you'd go to this grotty little shop, you know, full of like homeless dudes who were smoking cigarettes. And so it was not a nice experience. And so this is the milieu in which launching the lottery was introduced, and the lottery felt squeaky clean compared to all these options. There were these underground dens where you could play mahjong and so forth, or other underground gambling places, but there just weren't that many like mainstream places to gamble. And then things started to change. In the 1970s, a family that lived on an Indian reservation, an Indian family, American native family, they lived on an Indian reservation, they got a tax bill, a real estate tax bill. They're like, well, we live on the Indian reservation. What are we paying real estate taxes for? It's a tribal, it's a separate nation, right? So they decided to fight it. They took it to court. They said, we're not paying this tax bill. And the county said, hell yeah, you are. So they had a fight. And they won. So the county appealed. It went up to the state Supreme Court. I forget which state it is. And at the state Supreme Court, the people lost. The state prevailed. They appealed it. It went to the Supreme Court of the United States, and Justice Brennan wrote the opinion that said, states do not have the right to tax the Indian reservations. Not only that, they don't have the right to regulate the Indian reservations. So the Supreme Court handed down a much bigger judgment than just you can't send a tax bill to people who live on an Indian reservation. They said you can't actually regulate any activity. And that was all the tribes needed. The Seminole tribe in Florida was very aggressive. They had bingo halls, but now they started to really roll out all kinds of low-level initially gambling, but very quickly this turned into a business. Here in California, the Chumash tribe and the Morongo tribe. The Morongo Indians, if you've driven to Palm Springs, you've passed by that gigantic, beautiful casino that they've got. It's like a mini Vegas, right? But in the 1970s, they had like trailers and some government-issued housing. It was a very poverty-stricken group of people. They basically had nothing. And so they saw this opportunity to get into the gaming business. And so now today, here's what it looks like in the United States. Since the 1980s, this process took several Supreme Court battles, but by the late 1980s, it was clear that native tribes in the United States have the right to run gaming. They created a compact with the state. So typically, they'll work with the state that they're in to coordinate their activity. And then whatever's legal in that state is legal in the tribe, so that they try to minimize the amount of conflict. And the state also gets to participate in the taxes. The '1 contributor to electoral campaigns in California is the Morongo Indian tribe. So the states responded in the late 80s, early 90s. The states that were on the river started to launch riverboat casinos. And the states that weren't on a river, they started to turn their racetracks into racinos. So that's like a gambling casino thing inside of a racetrack. So basically where they already had legal gambling, that started to spread. Then also by the late 90s, we had offshore. These were not legal at all, but they were proliferating in the late 90s, Caribbean casinos and other offshore casinos on the internet. And it's always a thing that's kind of just on the brink of happening, but now it's actually starting to roll out. So you have online gaming happening all over in Europe, and it's on its way in the United States. You now have legal poker in Vegas, and in New Jersey, they just passed a law that will allow the casinos to offer a range of products. And now there's talk about creating a multi-state compact. So you'll have Nevada and New Jersey will create a compact so that they can share players and liquidity and thereby get much bigger player pools, much bigger prizes for poker. They're starting with poker because the casinos won't lose anything. They won't commoditize themselves. Poker only counts for about 1% of what a terrestrial casino makes. So by launching poker, they're not really going to hurt themselves. Where it's going to get crazy is when they put slots up on the internet, and that's clearly coming. We're barreling down that path. So you might say in the United States, it's a race between the states to put their lotteries on the internet versus the casinos that are going to try to roll out some kind of nationwide compact of all the gambling states. We also have a proliferation of things that aren't quite gambling, but they're pretty close, like fantasy sports. There's now all these amazing fantasy sports apps for your phone. And then, of course, Facebook and social gambling, which I'll have a bit to say about. So what's happened then in the last 10 years is a giant shift where gambling used to be something grotty and nasty. You had to go to some underground den of iniquity to go gamble, you know, and the only legal place to do it was to go to your 7-Eleven or gas station and buy a scratch-off ticket. That was like the squeaky clean way to gamble. But that's shifted a lot. Now gambling's everywhere. With riverboat casinos and Indian tribal casinos and the racetrack casinos, everybody who lives in the continental 48 states, the lower 48 states, not Alaska or Hawaii, every resident of those 48 states is within a 3-hour drive of a casino. So suddenly, in the last 20 years, we've seen gambling proliferate across the country. Ohio just passed casino laws. They're now introducing casinos in Ohio. They did it because all the surrounding states had casinos, and they were losing tax revenue because people would drive over the border. So unless you're living in a state like Utah that will never have any kind of gambling, I think also Hawaii is one of those states, you can assume basically that every state's going to launch some form of gambling, and they're going to bring it onto the internet. So let me talk a little bit about social games. This is a big chart, but so 12% of the world's population plays online social games. Kind of an amazing stat. These figures come from Morgan Stanley. 800 million people, 20% of them play a casino-style game. How many people have checked out social gambling games on Facebook? If you haven't, you've got to check this out. It is the white-hot epicenter of evolution of gaming right now. It's important. It may not be your thing. I'll show you some examples. It's the innovation that's happening there that's amazing. So these are free-to-play games. And as you can see, they only convert a very small number to pay, 2%, but it generates a fair bit of money. 2% of those players generate $1.7 billion. Contrast that with all the people in the world who are legally playing online gambling. It's only 50 million people, so that number dwarfs the number of people playing legal games. But this 50 million generates 35 billion, as much money as the U.S. casinos, the terrestrial casinos make. So worldwide online gaming is actually quite huge in terms of revenue. So these two things are in conflict. Morgan Stanley published this report, and they predicted that the two things are going to merge. And the reason I think they're going to merge is that the innovation is happening in the social gaming space, and the money is in the regulated gaming space. And so they expect the regulators are going to start to look cross-eyed at these games. In Europe already, there's a lot of work underway to regulate those free-to-play social casino games. So I think it's safe to predict that in 2014, you'll see some form of regulation hit the social gaming business in Europe. It's already happened in Japan. The regulators came in and stopped 2 companies because they had built a kind of in-game purchase that involved a kind of gambling, and so the regulators came in and stopped that. I don't know what's going to happen in the U.S. because we don't tend to regulate games like that. Second trend, glamour and gaming. So again, go back to the 1970s, this is the 1950s. Gambling had a perception of being something evil. I remember this clearly when I was a little kid. Again, I was going to church. Gambling was a sin. It was a terrible thing to do. The government shouldn't be involved in it. Only bad people gambled. Here's a great example. Tom Landry, the coach of the Dallas Cowboys, he said gambling is a disease as destructive as alcoholism or drug abuse. That was the mentality when I was a kid. That's how people looked at gambling. It was something that bad people did. If you gambled, it was evil. It was a sin. But then a new thing started to happen in the 1970s. Hollywood started to take a new look at anti-heroes. And we discovered that these are fascinating characters. And so in Los Angeles, we started to make shows and films that featured the evil guys as the most interesting people in the world. That's always kind of been true. If you think of like a Disney movie, the villain is always the most interesting person, right? Cruella de Vil, right? The evil person's always the most interesting character on the screen. But there's a big shift. So we used to have movies where the good guy, the sheriff, was the good guy. He was the focal point. And then we shifted to movies like Scarface by the 1980s. So this remains one of the most popular movies, by the way, on VOD and rental all over the world, which is about this bloodthirsty killer. TV shows like Dragnet, where the detectives, these frankly pretty boring detectives, were the heroes. And then we shifted to shows like The Sopranos by the late 1990s, where the bad guy, the evil guy, became the focal point because he was such an interesting character. Even in music, you had a crooner like Nat King Cole, but today we have gangster rappers like 50 Cent who point a gat at your face. I mean, that's like a huge shift in pop culture in just a couple generations. And the epicenter of this trend is Las Vegas. So Las Vegas has somehow managed to turn sin into a marketable commodity. That's the middle of the word casino, by the way, just in case you wonder where I got that from. So Hollywood doesn't miss the opportunity to make shows. We do shows about Vegas. We do movies that are set in Vegas. Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but it's always kind of a fun thing for us. We've turned Vegas into kind of a playground for adults where everything legal and everything quasi-illegal is possible, permissible, and you do whatever you do, and then it stays there. You get showgirls on the floor. You can rent a machine gun. You can shoot off a clip. Royal people go there and prance around naked and have romps, and it shows up in the tabloids. So this is what Vegas has become for us. And somehow, magically, Vegas also manages to be a family-oriented destination. I don't know how they pull this off. This is one of the most amazing balancing acts ever done in history. So you go to Vegas for family fun night, and there's nights, and you can go and see, the Eiffel Tower and the Venice and so forth. And it works. Look, people take pictures, like snapshots, like, hey, our family, we had fun in Vegas. This is Sin City. When I was a kid, Vegas was so bad. It was like a sewer. Like, you would never dream of taking a kid there. It's where gangsters went. Now it's like, oh, yeah, hey, we're going to Vegas for the weekend. Same thing has happened with poker. This is a poker den in the 1970s. So if you were going to play poker with pros for real money in the 70s, you had to go like to some back alley or some back room in a saloon or something full of smoke and deal with some pretty marginal figures. Today, okay, they're still marginal figures, but they're on television, right? And they're on the cover of magazines. And it's even in shows like Friends, like poker's gone mainstream. It's unbelievable how much it's gone mainstream. Now they have these world tours that go around, regional tours like World Poker Tour and the World Series of Poker, where any schlub can win millions of dollars playing poker. It's become a mainstream thing. It's not a bad thing. You see people put on Facebook, stats, I'm playing poker. It's a normal thing to do. Very low barrier to entry. So there used to be a lot of arcane lore and strategy on how to win in poker. It was something that you had to be an expert to know. So it was a very insider thing. The barriers have been lowered now, so anybody can learn how. There's all these guides. You can get a version for your mobile phone that will teach you how to do it. I was talking to Tom Kozik, good long-term metal guy, and he said, he goes, something's changed in our culture when housewives know what the river card is. It's like the jargon that riverboat gamblers used to use, and now we swap it around. In fact, we have a version for the family that you can play at home, a 6-player edition. There are babysitters who teach kids blackjack. So this has become totally mainstream culture. Gambling culture is mainstream. Meanwhile, the lottery hasn't changed. They still sell their tickets the same old way, no glamour. They sell them in shops like this, little cigarette, tobacco shops, alcohol shops, and gas stations, convenience stores, and so forth. So you look at that and you go, wow, Vegas has like completely amped up the glamour quotient. They're on steroids when it comes to glamour. And here's where the lottery sells their tickets. They have absolutely no glamour. It's devoid of glamour. I tell the lotteries they have to rethink their entire business because the customer's expectations have changed. Our culture has changed. Our thinking about gambling has changed. Our thinking about what a game should consist of and how I should get access to it, that's all changed. They haven't changed any of that. So I start out by saying, look, you got to rethink the competition. Right now, they think of their competition as casinos, tribal casinos, and lotteries. But when you move this to the internet, there's a sort of dirty digital secret that comes through, which is that these things all look identical on the web. They're all the same. When you look at anybody in the world who's launched online regulated gaming, whether it comes from a casino or some kind of government agency or a lottery, it always looks like this. It's some form of slot machine, which is really just a random number generator on the server side that's secure with a player database that's secure, and then a fancy UX, some kind of skin on the front that looks like a slot machine or something similar to that. They're all the same. So this means that the offerings from the casinos and the offerings from the lottery are going to be indistinguishable unless they rethink their games entirely. I liken it to like 3 vending machines. You know, when the tribes and the casinos and the lotteries launched their online gaming services, it's like telling consumers, pick which one of these things you think is the best user experience. They look identical to the consumer. There's no differentiation. If you don't differentiate in the digital environment, you get commoditized. So now imagine this. Imagine a casino that has no hotel, no bar, in fact, no physical infrastructure. It doesn't have any shows. There's no showgirls walking around. There's no dealers. There's no human beings in the casino. There's no walls. There's no game floor. There's no table games because there's no floor. There's no dice, cards, or chips. There's no coins, credit cards, or cash. What kind of casino is that? If you imagine it, you go, wait a minute, you just kind of wiped out the whole concept. It feels like a giant black hole, right? Like, you know, there's no casino at all, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Bitcoin casinos. So right now, you guys know about Bitcoin. Half of the transactions done in Bitcoin are for some form of gambling. It's totally secure. It's totally anonymous. This is a dream for gamblers. So casinos like this one, this is Satoshi Dice. It's the #1 Bitcoin casino. These sites are growing at 78% a month. Like every 2 months, they double in the terms of the number of transactions that are done. They started out very small. They're very, very young. These things are, you count their lifespan in months, not years. These things are very, very young. This site has been profitable since it launched. Of course, we don't know exactly how profitable, but it's making money. And they're making, you know, it's hundreds of thousands, not millions per month because it's relatively small. The whole thing is run with 1 part-time engineer. They have no staff. They have no staff. They have no facilities. They have no fraud because built into Bitcoin, in the blockchain, there's no fraud, there's no chargebacks. The transactions are 100% secure. They're also 100% transparent. In the BitChain, you can't have fraud, and as a result, they can say these payouts are instant and they're provably trustworthy, which is great. Compare that to the offshore casinos. You know, there's all these scandals of the offshore casinos. You have to buy a purse, you put money in. You can't always get your money back out. Even if you win, you can't get your money back. Sometimes they fold overnight. There's no recourse because those are offshore. There's no place to go complain. Here it's different. Once the transaction goes down, it's in the blockchain. It's built in. So these are growing really, really popular. A couple weeks ago, I gave the keynote speech at G2E, which is the big gaming industry, casino industry technology conference in Vegas. And I asked the audience how many people knew about Bitcoin casinos, and only 2 people raised their hands out of like 2,000. So the lottery and casino industry, they're not really looking out for this kind of disruption. They have to rethink their games. So these Bitcoin casinos all look the same, except for this one. This is called Dragon's Tail. What they've done, the guy who created this, he loves gambling, but he also loves role-play games. He said, why can't we combine the 2 things together? If you've played a role-play game, you know, you're always making choices. Should I go down that path or this one? Should I take this quest or that one? Hey, guess what? That's exactly what you do in a game of chance. And so he said, why don't we make a world where every item in the world, every path, every quest, every object you can pick up is something you can bet on. And so you'll meet a character that gives you a quest like this, and then as you proceed through, everything's a game. So you see these giant carrots, that's a pick'em game. If you pull stuff out, you might win a coin, you might win a prize or something as you play it. And the whole world, I mean, there's dozens and dozens of games built into this world. So they've created this kind of like themed adventure in this sort of metaphor of a typical RPG. There's like, you know, dragons and quests and stuff. I think you can get even more creative than that. But I guess the point I make to the lotteries and casinos is you've got to change the way your games look. You can't just go with a corny slot machine. People are so past that. Why don't they look like the games we have in consoles? There's no reason why you can't design a gambling game to look like this or this. Okay, so here's another experiment. Think about a casino where people pay money, but they don't win anything. They don't win any cash. So there's no real gambling going on here. And yet, they're bragging about it. And you think about that, you go, wait, hang on a second. What kind of casino would that be? Well, that would be social gambling. That's basically what happens in social gambling. You pay for the privilege of playing, and you win virtual currency, so it's something to brag about, but you can't actually get a cash prize out. Zynga Poker, that was about 30, in the high point, it was about 37% of their total revenue when they went public. This was like kind of the foundation of Zynga's actual business. We thought it was Farmville, but it was this poker game where people were paying to play, but they weren't getting winnings. So you didn't get cash back out. This confounds people in the regulated gaming business. They're like, I don't get it. What is the draw? Why are people playing these games? So it makes us rethink the gameplay. What they do in social games is they use a layered approach to gameplay. And this is actually a pretty important thing. How many people are interested in games? I can go quickly through this, but you want to, okay, so we'll do it. Great. All right, so half the people want to hear this. So, you know, when you design a game, there's always a core loop in the middle, particularly a social game. This is an activity that's fun to do, and you're going to be repeating it a lot, so it better be a fun thing to do. So this is My Vegas from Play Studios. They are affiliated with the MGM Grand, and this is a social game that you can get to on Facebook, and it is superb. So if you get an opportunity, it's My Vegas, and this is actually the game called Excalibur. So it's themed like the Excalibur Casino in Vegas. And if you get a chance to check this out, this is a superb example of the state-of-the-art social gambling game. And this is the white-hot center of innovation in the game business right now. So you look at it, you go, well, what's so hot? It's a slot machine. You spin, you get an animation that looks like reels are spinning, you get pay lines like, Rob, what are you talking? Where's the innovation, right? That's the core loop. So that core loop is kind of fun. You click a button and you spin, right? Watch what they do to make it fun. They add mini games. So as you're playing the game, every once in a while, when the right numbers line up or the right symbols line up, you get a little mini game that pops up on the screen. So pick one, red or black. Pick one. Which one should we pick, red or black? Red? Black. Good choice. Black won. Okay, so 750 points. Hey, I'm a winner, right? And now I'm willing to bet every time I play this, no matter what I pick, I win. So I get the feeling they're conditioning me here to kind of expect to win no matter what I do. You get lots and lots of frequent wins when you play these games. You don't lose much. Think about your experience with a lottery game. With a lottery game, you're conditioned to lose. Most people are losers. So this is a game that teaches you you're probably going to lose. These games teach you that you're probably going to win. That's not all they do. They have side games. So they've taken this little space on the side. There's a start. That's where you start. And you have this little character who's climbing up. So as you keep winning, as you get free spin bonuses, he climbs up one notch. And eventually, this cute girl pops up. And she says, just one more free spin. It's Rapunzel. You're going to rescue her from her castle. You see her up at the top there. And so your guy's climbing up. And then when you do, hey, what do you know? You win another 600 points. You're a star. So they give you lots of ways to win around that core loop. There's mini games. There's side games. These give you constant reinforcement as you continue to spin, spin, spin. And you're playing this game for hours. Then finally, there's a metagame. So as you get to a certain level, this guy pops up. Now, he's not a knight in armor. He's not a lady in a tower. He looks like a construction worker. So they totally busted their metaphor. You go, wait a minute, who's this guy? And he's like, hey, boss, you just won your My Vegas symbol, and you're building your own casino. And you're like, what? Click to continue. It takes you to this completely different zone. And what you can see is they've built this game. You're building Monte Carlo. You click that. That triggers the metagame. So it turns out, in fact, they've got dozens of slot machines. Excalibur is only one of them. Spanning all of them to make it a unified experience is this metagame, and it looks like this. It's basically like Sim City. You're building a virtual Vegas. So every time you hit the certain pay lines and you get these tokens, you're adding to your empire. So here you're building the Monte Carlo, then later you build the Circus, and you get rewards every single time. So one other thing they've done is as you advance through, it starts to unlock other slot machines. So hey, we just hit level 5 and we unlocked the Jules Verne game. And so now you can see it's a slot machine just like the previous one. All they did was reskin it, but they reskinned it with this Jules Verne theme, and I feel like that's another kind of win. I feel like I just unlocked a level or I unlocked a reward. And they have some themed games for that as well. So what they've done is they've designed these social games in such a way that you get frequent wins, you're unlocking levels, you're getting new experiences, and when you go back to a casino and play a regular slot machine, it feels totally antique by comparison. I was in Vegas about 3 weeks ago for the G2E event, and I was in the Palazzo, which is an awesome hotel, awesome casino. There was nobody on the floor. And one of the issues that they mentioned to me, they have a real problem right now, which is just the same as lotteries. The players are aging up. So the only people you see are 50 and 60 years old, which that comes as no surprise if you've been to Vegas. I don't really play casino games, so for me it was news, but you can see that firsthand. When you go to Vegas, try to look for the person under 30 who's playing slots. They're not there. They're not doing it. People under 30 who have money in Vegas, they go to the clubs. They're going to Hakkasan, they're going to the clubs at the Sand to listen to some DJ, play some electronic dance music. Like that's what's happening. They're spending $30,000 on champagne, but they're not on the floor, they're not gambling. So they have a real gigantic problem in Vegas. So I also talked to the lotteries and casinos about rethinking their business model. A mature business wants revenue maximization, and everything they do in paid gaming is about revenue. But in fast growth markets, like social gaming, you focus on audience maximization. You're going to just grab audience, which means no barriers. Remove all the barriers. So if you look at how you make money in an iPhone game right now, 66% of the games on iPhone are free, and of those, 93% use in-app purchasing. How many people are familiar with in-app purchasing? Everybody. Great. All right, so we can go fast. Here's how it works. So we're back to that game, My Vegas. And they say, hey, here's some free chips. Just because you're a new player, we're going to give you this offer. Just click here to get your free chips, or you can click no thanks. So I click get free chips, And look at this, they're going to get a credit card imprint. They're not going to charge me. But what this does is it sets up instant click, one-click purchase, right? So it's genius. They're going to pre-authorize your card, and they pre-authorize it for $200. Even though, what are they charging here? $3 value. Okay, so you think you're going to get pre-authorized for $300. They're going to pre-authorize you for $199, because then later in the game, once they have that, you're going to start to see these things pop up periodically where you can't get past the barrier without buying chips. So you'll get a message that says, gee, you don't have enough in your bank account to cover that bet. If you're playing maximum bets and maximum pay lines, this girl pops up and says, you're going to have to buy some chips. But because you're new, we got a special offer for you. You can buy 900,000 chips for $199. You'd be amazed if people actually do this, right? Because you're like, why would you buy virtual chips for a free game where you're not going to win anything? It seems insane to me that you would do this, right? Now, if you do click this, oh, and they put time pressure on you as well. That's why I circled that. So it's like, psychologically, you're in the middle of winning. You're like, yeah, click, 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 click. And you're clicking these games like this. Like, yeah, click the $199, fine. As soon as you do, you get another pop-up that says, we're going to offer you that one more time. This is the last time you're going to see that offer. So they actually monetize $400. And they can do this within about 4 hours of playing. So if you think about the way we used to sell games, we would spend a couple years with a team of like 50 or 100 people developing a game. You'd fix it. You'd bug test the thing. You'd get the thing all set. Then you'd press a gold master, and you'd ship the game out, and you'd sell that game for PlayStation or Xbox for about $50, right? That was the game business in the old day. These free-to-play games, 98% play for free, but the 2% that monetize, they monetize at the rate of thousands of dollars a month. Did you guys know that? I mean, it's astonishing. You've got to check this out. It's completely screwing up the economics of the game business. And the companies that are good at it, like Supercell in Finland or King.com in the UK, these companies are absolutely brilliant at designing these games because they're working on the psychology of the player. And what they can do with the network game is they have real-time data analytics, so they can see what parts of the game are working. They can move they can drop the pay barrier anywhere they want. They can find out immediately if that worked better or didn't. So they're constantly tweaking the game to adjust their yield. All right, so let's rethink entertainment value. This is a little chart I put together for the lottery because I wanted to show them that the world had changed a little. So for every dollar you spend, how much entertainment do you get? Cinema. A movie's 2 hours. It costs about $12. In LA, it's $20. Whatever. It's about $6 an hour if you buy a ticket to a theater. A video game, when we build video games for the consoles, we would try to make about 40 hours of gameplay at least. So you pay $40, it's about $1 an hour of gameplay, of entertainment. Cable television, people bitch about all the time. Actually, it's the best value going in terms of the number of hours of entertainment you get from it. And that's why people aren't unsubscribing from cable. Because of all their entertainment options, for $1 per hour basis, it's still the best bargain. And a social game, well, these are amazing because you really never need to pay if you're clever. If you get tricked, you might end up paying, or if they get your psychology screwed up like I just described, then you might pay a real lot of money, but that's only a small number. Now let's think about the lottery. You buy a lottery ticket for $1 or $2, and it's not even 5 minutes of fun. It's like 13 seconds of fun to scratch a ticket, and it's not really that much fun. You get that kind of like vinyl stuff on your fingernail and a scratch. Like, that's not fun. I've never understood the appeal of these games. So like, look, guys, from $1 per hour standpoint, you're no fun. Their approach to making it fun is to drive up the jackpots. So for the last 20 years, this is really where the innovation has happened in the US lotteries, bigger and bigger jackpots. So in the 1990s, we created Powerball and Mega Millions. Just a couple years ago, there was the biggest jackpot ever, $590 million was won in Powerball. This is a kind of amazing number. The problem is they call the problem jackpot fatigue, because this is another kind of operant behavior conditioning. And so what happens is you get conditioned to expect big jackpots. Now, it's not always 100 million. When you start the jackpot clock ticking, it's small. And if a week passes, nobody claims it, then it goes up and it goes up. And eventually, it'll get up to 300 million. That's pretty exciting. And then you see a huge behavior shift. Everybody goes out and buys a ticket, right? You've seen it. You've been in an office. People go, wow, did you see the California lottery? It's a huge number. Let's go get a ticket, right? That happened. That's a very, very common phenomenon. But what happens is until you get to that big jackpot, most of the time nobody pays attention. And because the jackpots keep getting bigger and bigger, we've been getting conditioned to think that the only big win, the only worthwhile win is $300 million, $400 million, $500 million. Now, I got to tell you, if you won $24 million on the lottery, your life would change forever, and the lives of your children and all your progeny forever would be changed. That would be an incredible outcome for you. But that's not how lottery players look at it now. They're like, 24 million, that's nothing. I'm not buying a ticket. So we have to rethink winning. So the social games, the social gambling games, they have a lot of ways to win. And if you like them and friend them and you invite a friend in, you get bonuses. So you're constantly winning. And they're just constantly reminding you of ways that you're going to win. I'm not going to dwell on it. I talked about some of these dynamics, the mini games and the Vegas Builder. That's that big metagame that I described. These are all ways to get you to feel like a winner, even if you're losing cash, because you will never win a cash on these games ever. But they try to obscure that fact by giving you lots of virtual prizes. So if you compare the prize value versus the odds, this is actually interesting. Prize value, high and low, the odds of winning, bad, and then somewhat better. And it is, after all, gambling. You're never going to feel like you got great odds. Okay, so the typical lottery game, you have very, very poor odds, but you might win a really big prize. That's the dream. That's why people buy lottery tickets. That's what draws us into it. But your odds are terrible. The odds of winning Powerball, 1 in 175 million. Like, they're terrible. Your odds of getting hit by lightning are 1 in 500,000. Your odds of getting hit by a car on the way to buy a Powerball ticket are so much better than your odds of winning. You're better off staying at home. Casino game, you have much higher odds. Like, it depends on the game. I'd never play roulette. It's the worst odds of any table game in the United States. We have different tables and roulette wheels than elsewhere. Craps is the best odds. 21, a lot of people like to play because they feel like there's some element of strategy. They have some kind of control. So you have different kinds of odds, but basically you're going to win less money. So you have a lower prize value, but better odds. Now take a look at social gaming. When I say they're conditioning us to expect something different, here, a typical social game, you're almost guaranteed to win almost every time. You won't win cash, but you're going to win something, a token, a badge, a point, or something, right? And so you pay 0, and you have almost 100% odds of winning a prize. They're teaching us to expect to win more often. And for the lotteries, this is devastating because their games teach you to lose, right? They teach you to expect to lose. It doesn't compare. Now, the lotteries also don't act like a winner. I'm winding up. This is it. So act like a winner. I always tell you, come on, you've got to get into this a bit more. This is what a lottery winner looks like. This lady looks like a librarian who just gave you a penalty for bringing a book back late. She just won $25 million. This guy looks like he's constipated. He won $4 million. And then this guy won $500,004, and he looks drunk. Look at him. He looks like he got mugged, right? It's like a homeless dude. And I thought about that. I was like, he looks drunk. In fact, I said, let's look at DUI photos. So I found some celebrity DUI photos, and I realized they look like they're having more fun than a lottery winner. So here's this guy. He's looking all grumpy. He won $2 million. Now here's what a game show winner looks like. So when we produce a game show, we coach the people to look like winners, right? And with the lotteries, they don't ever do this. They don't, because it doesn't matter, right? They're bureaucrats. They're not going to get paid more money if they get the audience to get excited. So they don't bother to do it. So they miss this incredible emotional moment. Because these prizes, you're talking about winning, look, $50,000. It's trivial relative to a lottery payout. But people are like, high-fiving and body thumping and rolling around on the floor. So I think the lotteries could win by having a campaign that says people really win. When I was at MTV, we used to always do these people really win campaigns to show you that actually people won those crazy contests we had at MTV. And Game Show Network is doing something similar. They're showing real people winning. Meanwhile, in the lottery, the trend lately is that you don't even go claim your ticket. Your attorney calls and says, my client has the ticket, but we're going to withhold the identity because they don't want your cousin in the trailer park to come hit you up for cash. And so they can't even name the person who won the prize. Okay, so those are some of the big trends shaping it. That's why I think the lottery business is about to get reshaped. Those gigantic trends. You guys have been very patient to listen to me rant and rave about all this stuff, but I thought you'd find it interesting to see all these big global trends that are starting to shape this old government-regulated business that just hasn't changed that much in the last 30 years. And I also thought you'd get a kick out of learning, why is the government in the gaming business? So now you know it all. You're all experts in the lottery. Thank you.
See, I feel bad. I feel bad for the people that didn't show up. Get over here, Robert. Where are we going?
Oh,
wait. You said there's 2 businesses that really are on the government side doing all this, right? Mm-hmm. Why isn't there room to get involved? Why wouldn't somebody want to pitch to the government saying, hey, this is a better way that will generate more money?
There's a solution. So I took it out because the talk was long. Privatization. And when I worked at Sony, that was our approach. We got nowhere with the state lotteries, but we went to Australia where they're privatized. And they're open for business. They run it like a business. Like, yeah, people want to do this. They're going to do it whether we offer it or not. They'll just do it illegally. So let's run it like a business. When you go to Finland, same thing. So in Finland, it's a government-run corporation, government-owned corporation, but they run it like a business. People are incentivized to run it, grow it. So they do sportsbook, they do everything in mobile. They've been on mobile since 1997.
Any advantage or any way to get in the United States market, or is that just
So
going to be locked up?
we're privatizing U.S. lottery, 2 of them. Illinois privatized about a year ago. Hasn't gone so well.
It's Illinois.
Yeah, tough. I mean, you got it. I mean, it's no joke, right? It's a tough state. And then Pennsylvania, they did the RFP for privatization, but then the Attorney General sued the governor saying that he doesn't have the right to privatize the lottery. So it's a little weird. One of the downsides of privatizing, the way privatizing works is a company comes in, they say, we'd like to run the lottery. They run an RFP, so they get multiple bids. So there's competition. And the government says, all right, the payout that we have, we mandate the payout is 50% or 70%, some amount. So of all the money that comes in, 70% goes out as prizes. And then the remaining amount, the government sets a target for their quota, what they get, basically the tax. And then there's this little teeny bit left. That's what the operator gets. And so if you come in to privatize, you have to guarantee all of that. And then if you surpass that, then you get to keep the prize. So basically, what happens when you privatize is you get aggressive marketing campaign, massive expansion. You get those one-armed bandits. They call them virtual lottery terminals, but they look just like slot machines. And those start showing up in 7-Elevens and in gas stations and bars and stuff. And so a lot of people don't like this because they look at it as like government is now massively expanding by handing it over to a private business. But it's the best way to run it, in my view, because like run it like a business. If the government can't do that, then hire a company that can and get the benefit. The money does go to good things. That's the other thing you need to know.
Ken Cragen? Ken?
Hey, in August, I bought 2 tickets for $150 to the Oceanic Institute drawing for $1 million house or $1 million in cash. Now, I wanted to make the contribution anyway, but in effect, isn't it it's a drawing? It's basically a lottery of sorts. You can win $1 million. They limit it to 20,000 people, so you have a higher chance of a win in terms of percentage. But the interesting thing they also do is if they don't sell X number of tickets, they can lower the amount they're actually giving away. But isn't that in a sense a form? And I've seen a lot of those now since I did that.
Yeah, the old rule on a regulated game is if you're paying cash and it's a game of chance and there's a cash or monetary prize, a valuable prize, that is technically a lottery and that is the province of the government alone. That's the rule. I have no idea how they're doing that.
I got to tell you a quick story. When I was on WLS out of Chicago a long time ago, we gave $10,000 a week away in a lottery. It was a sweepstakes, right?
Yeah.
And what we did is, every week we did this. After 6 months, we contacted every person that won that, and they almost all used the money for the same thing. They paid off their bills.
Yeah.
And they did not tell their friends that they won the money because they didn't want to say how much debt they were in, right?
It's the #1 radio promotion is pay your bills, right?
So what we did instead is we gave away $10,000 of a trip around the world.
Also good, yeah.
And then we contacted the same people. They said, 1, it changed their lives, and 2, they told all their friends about the station.
Oh, that's smart.
So it was interesting to where the money wasn't really what
That's
won.
really
It
smart.
was the value of the experience.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're right.
But I want to give you a chance to hang out with Rob Tercek. Make sure you sign up for tomorrow's hike, everyone, and see you next week. Thanks a lot, everyone.